and beneficiaries of the system. So I'm actually coming up on my 3rd anniversary as city manager next Friday. And since I became city manager, I created a parking committee of city staff to address some of the problems. The parking study, the first parking study was completed in November 2006, shortly before I became city manager. And up to that time, the Public Works Director is the primary person who manages and operates the system. It's the Department of Public Works that collects the coins and fixes the meters and manages the maintenance and the expansion and the operations of the system. But when I became city manager and this parking study had just recently been done, it was very clear that parking is a interdepartmental and an interagency issue. So I asked the Director of Public Works, the police chief, who actually oversees parking enforcement, the DDA director, because like I said, downtown is the primary user and beneficiary, and also the city's finance director to get together and put their heads together initially on the recommendations from the 2006 study. And there were 23 recommendations in that study. We've acted on a lot of them. And this list that I have here is it's a status report from February 2009 that we presented to the council at that time, and it talks about all the things that had already been done. At that time, the city had hired additional parking enforcement officer in 2006. That was before I even became city manager, so I'm not going to take credit for that one. The enforcement officers were enforcing permit parking locations. We renovated the Troy Street lot in 2008. We installed new bike racks downtown in 2008 and again in 2009 to take some pressure off of the parking system. We've also increased parking capacity by adding new on-street parking spaces on Bermuda Street. The lot that is still technically known as the Rosie O'Grady's lot was reconstructed last summer, and we squeezed a couple extra spaces into that lot by reconfiguring it. And excuse me, we also put on-street parking spaces here on West Troy. The City Council increased parking rates in both, I think, 07, 08, and 09 to bring more revenue into the parking system to fund these kind of improvements. In 2008, we shifted enforcement hours from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. to 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. to capture more of that late night bar traffic. Can we go all the way until 2 a.m.? Sure. In September 2008, the council enacted a payment in lieu of parking ordinance. Under the current zoning ordinance, if a downtown property owner has parking spaces on private property, and they want to take those parking spaces away to expand a building or to redevelop their building, the ordinance says they have to replace them somewhere within 500 feet. Well, that's kind of hard to do, so what we created there was a system where instead of replacing those, they could make a payment into the parking fund so that the city could fund the kind of parking increases that we've been doing over the last several years. In February 2009, the City Council awarded a contract for a parking structure site feasibility study based on the Parking Committee's recommendation. That study was completed in June. That's the study where the Carl Walker Inc. looked at all the parking lots that the city owns on the east side of Woodward and figured out if the city's going to build a parking lot on the east side, where should it go? What's the most cost-effective place to put it? And we actually did look at taking some houses and turning them into parking. There are actually some houses in Ferndale that are zoned parking, and mine is one of them. In 1985, my house is adjacent to parking on two sides, a private lot on one side and a public lot on the other. And in 1985, when I was 9 years old, the city bought an option to purchase that house, never exercised it. That was when MDOT was forcing the city to get the parking out of the median. And so nothing ever came of that. I bought the house in '02 when I was the assistant to the city manager of Oak Park, and shortly after that became a committee member and the chairman of the Ferndale DDA's Economic Restructuring Committee. Still knew nothing about the city's former plans to make my house into a parking lot, but it was only after I became city manager that my administrative assistant, showed me these old resolutions from 1985 and after, and I was like, oh boy, I hope that's not the best place to put a parking deck, because even if it is, if somebody's going to raise a holy stink that the city's buying the manager's house for a parking. Long story short, that didn't come to pass. The parking consultant identified the City Hall parking lot as the prime spot for the east side structure. During that process, after that parking structure site feasibility study was completed, I, in July 2009, indicated that I was going to direct the parking committee to create a thorough financial plan for a parking structure during the fiscal year ending 2011 budget process. Now that budget process doesn't start until March. And I directed them to do that again in November. So it's always been my intent for the city to thoroughly analyze financial options for funding the parking structure. I just didn't intend to do it until this spring, because that's the time when the city looks at all of its budgets and all of its priorities and really hashes those things out. So, I mean, quite frankly, the decision to delay the municipal building project had less to do with the community forums about parking and more to do with the need to look at all the city's priorities at the same time during that budgeting process. So that's when we're gonna look at these issues. We're gonna look at these solutions, whether city staff does the financial analysis or we hire a consultant to help us do it. I don't care, just so long as it gets done. I'm open either way. But the other big thing that has been lacking up to this point is the public input, and I applaud the DDA for hosting these community forums and getting that input, because as I've indicated, it's the Downtown Development Authority, the business owners, the property owners, the customers that are really the primary customers of the auto parking system. And we all need to do a better job in engaging those customers and engaging those users, because the customers and the users of the parking system have a lot of different conflicting opinions and viewpoints on the system itself and how to fund the system and how to fund the expansion of the system. So again, I applaud the DDA for hosting these forums and giving us an opportunity to bring this issue front and center, and be happy to answer any questions. And thank you for coming. We were here for 3 hours on Saturday with 3 actual residents, or 2 residents and a business owner. Everybody else was already on a parking committee of one sort or another. So thanks to those of you who came out this morning to talk about this.
Thank you. And Jennifer Rosenberg from the Ferndale Chamber of Commerce will be our moderator for the Q&A section. So I thank her for doing that. And I'm going to be taking notes, but Bob and Jackie and myself and anyone else actually in the room who has answers are here at your disposal to answer questions. First question first. You're good now?
I don't know if I worded it very well, but what's our next step to what I think is probably the priority of getting a professional to come in and
Well, I'm going to
getting some action.
turn that one over to Bob and Christina, because they know way better than I on what the next steps are.
The city's budgeting process is going to start in March. That process involves a lot of public meetings to talk about the budget. So I anticipate that we'll have a meeting to talk about the auto parking fund. And at that time, the DDA parking committee and the parking committee of city staff can present whatever financial plans we have at that time. And if the council or the staff or the DDA or anybody else feels that that's not sufficient, we need additional plans and studies on financing parking structure, then we can hire a consultant to do that.
So we're not really.